Thanks, Richard. So welcome to today, Module 2. This is part of the training from the Archive Sector Development team at the National Archives. If just on housekeeping, and just like before, if everyone can just stay muted during the training, unless there's a point where we're actually having a conversation, and of course in the breakout rooms, that would just make it easier, minimise barking dogs and doorbells and so on, and phones ringing, and stop distraction for all of us. Do use the chat box as we go through to make comments or ask questions, and I will respond to those as I can. Richard's going to help steward and manage those as well. So if you have any technical issues or any questions about anything, please use the chat box, or if it's a technical issue particularly around sound or technology, then if you can directly message Richard in the chat box, that would be great. For those of you who, hopefully most of you have been on Module 1 and met me, virtually at least. So my background in fundraising, working in the sector about 17 years and a consultant for the last 8. And there's a lot of experience in fundraising. I also wanted to mention, particularly because it's relevant today, that I've also got experience in grant making. So I've both worked in the grant making organisation, and I've also sat as the trustee and chair of trustees of a grant making charitable trust as well. And I'm going to use some of that a little bit in today's conversation. So welcome back. Thank you for joining me, and we'll get going. So as I've already said, this is module 2 of 4 modules. In the first module we looked at how do you identify funding and how do you decide which funding to apply for, and today we're moving on to thinking about structure and content. And actually some of the structure you might find familiar from other resources, and I'll give you Richard's going to give the link in just one moment. But before we talk about that, just want to mention that the module 3 and module 4 will fill out the detail. So today we're talking about the first parts of structure in a bid, need and solutions, and on Monday and Wednesday next week we're looking at module 3 about impact and added value. Module 4 is at the end of the week on Thursday, where we're looking at budget and stewardship. So without further ado, let's think about structure. And I think the key thing to think about structure is that there is no such thing as a typical structure. Whether you're writing a bid, you may be writing on an application form, you might be given a maximum number of words or sides of A4, you might be asked to complete some kind of document which is not necessarily a form but has space in response to particular areas of your work. There's no such thing as typical. And it's also important to remember that a written form is only part of an application process. Conversations with the funder, whether those are formal or informal, or maybe in the form of pitches, or through meetings with, for example, grant making trustees, can all form part of an application process. So I think when you're thinking about a structure to an application, it's not just about what you write down and the order you write things down in. It is about how you communicate and the story you're telling to the organisation. So the story you're pitching is more than just the written word. And because you're telling a story when you're fundraising, you need to make sure that story is consistent across all of the ways that you communicate externally. So yes, that's absolutely valid in your written pitches and your applications, but you need to reflect that elsewhere. And as I mentioned, my role as a grant maker was one where the first thing I would typically do when receiving an application, I'd have a quick scan of it, but I'd go and look at the organisation's website. I'd go and maybe look at them on social media. I'd just get a sense of who they were. And then when I was reading the application, I'd be looking to make sure that that application and what they were asking for money for and the project, the activities they were looking to do, I'd be looking to make sure that that tallied with the profile they had externally. Because if it didn't, I'd get some real concerns. Like, well, why are they doing this? Where's their expertise? Why them? Why their background? How does that tally? How does that make sense? So making sure that that storytelling you're doing as a funder, as a fundraiser, isn't undone by the world around you is really important. So making sure your work is rooted in your profile and your persona, and that's echoed in all of your external communications, is really important. And just one last point when you're thinking about structure. Often it's kind of one of the things you often get asked when I do training on bid writing is, oh, Leah, I've done lots of short or small applications and I feel really confident on those, but I don't really think, not ready to do longer applications. What's the difference between doing a big application or a long one? And the answer is actually very little. I don't think there is any difference really. in actual fact, sometimes short bids or short applications might feel easier or simpler, but actually they can lead to problems further down the line, because if you've written quite a simple application, you haven't necessarily had the time to think through what the project might be. And there may be expectations that haven't been managed well for the funder. Sometimes the advantage of longer detailed bids is they force you to plot out every stage of a project. And so sometimes it's worth making sure that you understand the structure of your project in order to complete even a short application. So when we're thinking about structure, we're thinking quite broadly. We're thinking about all the ways that we develop, we design, and we deliver our funding applications. And so the learning we're going to pick up in this advanced bid writing is less about what goes into those sections, but how do you develop them and how do you make those really tailored and really specific for your funder. Okay, so for those of you who are aware, we did some, Richard and I and a couple of other consultants, including Claire, who's delivering the other modules, the other modular course on crowdfunding and digital, that wrote some materials for the fundraising for archives project a few years ago. And there were a couple of courses where this you may have seen this if you're aware of those things. And Richard's put the link in the chat to those where you can access those resources online. And we created these elements of a case for support. So it was in the case for support and the fundraising for archives bid writing course. And you may just even know them from your own experience of fundraising and feel like, yes, they feel familiar. And absolutely, these are the elements you're going to need in any kind of application process. And we're going to, as I say, look at these a bit more in depth. Today, we're going to focus on needs. So why is this work required? Solutions, what are you offering to meet that need? And then on the next module, module 3, we're going to be talking about impact, added value, and finally, as I said before, module 4, budget. So let's start with need. And just a quick recap on what I mean by need, but I'm going to assume that you're comfortable with this and you're comfortable gathering the information you require to demonstrate the need for funder support. So by need, we're talking about what is the issue or problem we're trying to solve, why is that important, how do you know it's there, and what would happen if nothing was done. So I'm going to assume that you're ready for that, and instead we're going to look at how you align that with your potential funders' requirements and interests. So really, how do you do that? Ultimately, when you're thinking about how to articulate the need for your work, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the person who's going to read that application or respond to your approach. Who are they? Is it a member of staff, a local authority, for example? Is it a trustee of a family-run grant maker? Or is it a grants assessor employed by a large foundation? And depending on who they are, what do they want to hear? And also, how do they want to hear it? You need to be thinking about, how do I find that information? Well, what have they funded before? That would give you a good indication of the kind of project. And I absolutely know there are some funders who like kind of like fluffy projects, if you know, things I think, oh, that looks nice. I can see a nice picture of that. Other funders might be very much about, I get the data. So thinking about the profile or the persona of the organisation or the person can really help you to think, well, what aspects of my project do I need to articulate in what way in order to really communicate this in the best way for them? Because the need itself won't change, just how you focus it and how you talk about it that will. So one way to really think about this is this idea of heart and head, or intellectual and emotional. Got that backwards that way, but yeah, intellectual, head, heart, and emotional. So there's two ways of really thinking about discussing and showing an argument. So I'm going to ask you, and this worked quite well this afternoon, so hopefully it'll work quite well today. If you can, just in the chat box, have a think about what kind of things might appeal to you if you're a head-focused person, an intellectual-focused person. If you're reading an application, what were the kind of things that perhaps you might expect to see if you were very much on the head side of things? Put in the chat box anything you might want to see if you can think of them. I'm going to try and type some of them up onto here. Oh, lovely. Thank you, Charlie, for starting us off. Fantastic. Oh, interesting. Some
passion.
Yeah, it's interesting. Someone's put passion. I'll come back to that one in a minute. Yeah.
Facts and figures.
Yeah.
Outcomes, stats.
This is a test on how fast I can type. There's no
objectives. Evidence.
Ooh.
User feedback. technical language, you got it all, Leah.
Have I got it all?
Causality demonstrated.
That's a good one.
Comparison with similar.
Yeah. I like the big picture as well. I was noticing when I put, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So those are really good examples. Thank you for that. So there's some really good, nice things. And well, we are very much thinking about that data. It's interesting that someone put passion, and we'll see what we say when we come to the heart and see if there's any similarities or any differences. But yeah, those things all feel like right to me. Okay. So I want to do the same thing now. I'm going to change the colour of my pen just in case my writing goes a little bit haywire. And if I can ask you to do the same thing, and but now put yourself with the hat on of a heart person, an emotional person. What kind of thing do you think they might like to see in an application or an approach? Again, sit in the chat. Lovely. Thank you, Rosie.
User needs, interests, individual and community impact and stories.
Oh, cathartic. One.
Case study, emotional language, human story. Lots of stories here.
Yeah.
Letters of support, personal, emotional, improvement to community.
Ooh. Yeah, we've got impact a couple of times, yeah.
Passion and excitement.
More passion. Yeah. Fantastic. I think there's some brilliant ones there. Yeah. And I think actually it is interesting, isn't it? There's maybe some things that do cut across and do feel like both, but it does feel there are two sides to this as well. And you guys have nailed it really, really well. So thank you so much for that. Okay, what I'm going to ask us to do now is to use this thinking and think about how different approaches and appeals really work, to look at an actual case study of how that happens. So I'm going to flick us onto the next slide, or I'll turn my annotation off. Well, that is not going to work. Bear with me 1 second. Oh, I've lost my mouse. Where is it gone? There we are. Helpful. Right. Okay, I'm going to get us onto the next slide. Oh, I didn't take my thing off, did I? Sorry guys, let me clear all my text. There we go, that's better. Was that last time? And you will have been sent in advance of today a PDF which has these two examples of ways of explaining a story. So the handout has got two imagine text of two appeals from the same organisation. And what I'm going to do in a moment, I'm going to put you into a couple of breakout groups, probably with sort of 3 to 4 people in each, and just ask you to have sort of 10-15 minutes in that group thinking about the heart and the head, and looking at how the heart and the head has been used here, and how perhaps you can see some of those words or some of those elements, for example data and statistics or passion and case studies, in each of those. So where can you see some of those elements that you talked about, and what are the pros and cons of each approach? Which would you choose to use, and is there certain places or time that you will not you choose to or not use a certain approach? So I'm going to stop the share. You've hopefully got that handout. If you don't have the handout, please do give me or Richard a shout. We can make sure you get it. I'm just going to stop the share so I can put the breakout groups on. When you're in the breakout groups, I say we'll give ourselves 15 minutes. If you need a bit longer, that's fine. We can adjust it. And likewise, if you actually feel like you're coming to the, you're coming to a natural end and we've run out of things to say and you're getting bored of each other's company, which I'm sure you won't, then please do come out. And so are you right to reattach the handout in the chat, Richard? If you just drag it in. Can you do that? If not, I can do it in a second. So yeah, if you can please, if any issues, give me a shout. Call me in as the host, and you can also leave the room, come back to the main room, please. If you just move 1 second, because if I, Kate, if you just stay in, I'm just going to open up the rooms so everyone else can go in. Kate, if you just stay in the main room, I'll attach the document for you once I've opened the rooms. So I can't do it at the same time. So let me bring it up for you. So I'll open the rooms now. Everyone except Kate, go in, because I can't send it to you when you're in the room, unfortunately, Kate. So if you just bear with me 1 second, I will put it in the chat. And everyone else, feel free to have opened the rooms. Oh gosh, I didn't click the button again. Oh, sorry. There we go. That's why no one was going. Here you go, Kate. I'm putting it in now. Oh, sent it to Richard by accident. Sorry. There we go. I'm trying again. There we go. Is it gone? Yeah, there you go. Fantastic. Hopefully you'll be able to access that. Okay.
Have you got it, Kate? Oh, she's gone.
I'm assuming that means she has.
Yeah, so it takes
Do
me.
you want to stop? Do you want to stop recording?
Oh yeah.
Richard, yeah. So Richard, press record again, everyone. Thank you so much for your time there. We were just having a quick chat. One of the groups which had a few people came back a little bit earlier, so we were just having a quick chat. But rooms 2 and 3, does someone from either room 2 or 3 want to unmute and tell us a little bit about how you found that? So I think one of the rooms had Jan in it, and one had I think I can't remember who else was in which room. Other people. So does anyone want to, from room 2 or 3, want to tell me what they thought? You can put it in the chat if you don't want to talk publicly, it's fine. I'll read it out. I'll give you all a moment. If no one does, I can tell you what, well, does anyone from room 1 want? Oh, yes, hello, who's that? Rosie.
Rosie, so I was with Jan and another Rosie, which I don't know where Jan's from, but I know Rosie's from a local museum. Jan's here. Oh, okay. Hi, sorry.
Hello.
I didn't know you could do that with Zoom. Yeah, I've only learned today that you can change people's names. So you get the 3 dots and you can, anyway,
You can, yeah.
very clever. So we spent most of the time, I think, on the like emotional appeal letter, but we did talk about the fact that it was missing things that the other evidence had. So there was no ask, there was no context in the emotional appeal. It was sort of first person. We didn't spend as much time looking at the other one. What we concluded is that you would need both, and in terms of maybe the emotional letter could be a letter of support, the first person one, but you might need other examples because you haven't got any contact text, so you don't really know enough information about it, but you need to research what your funder wants to hear about. Yeah. Or if it's as a letter, then you need to think about who's going to read it and will it have an impact on them.
Brilliant. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. You've been listening well. Yes, absolutely. And I think you echoed what I heard from the other groups very much there, which is that, yeah, the heart one doesn't necessarily chime on its own. You need some of the facts from the head. And yeah, we were chatting the first group. Richard was the person who actually put this exercise together and wrote those. So we were all, you're critiquing Richard. We did it on purpose. Absolutely. You know, the head one is, and the heart, head and heart, they're kind of at the end of the spectrum. And actually, in reality, where you need to be is somewhere in the middle. And you might be slightly more over this way if you're doing, say, crowdfunding or legacy type appeal, and slightly more over this way if you're doing something quite statutory service focused. So yeah, flick between the two. Jan, yeah.
Can I tailgate Rosie as well? Because I've just left you a message in the chat, Rosie. Rosie was talking about then how do we gather those stories and how do we gather evidence? You know, she's working within the library service and practically everybody in the service has got stories, but it's how they gather that. And so I dropped that in your chat feed. Rosie, that's the name of Moya Sayre Jones, is based in Australia, and she encourages organisations to put those structures in place in a really fun way so that they start to gather stories whole of organisation. And you can Google that webinar and find her.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Jan. That's a top tip. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move us on if that's all right from that, but hopefully found that interesting, a useful exercise, and a little bit interesting in the way of just thinking in reality how these kind of things work. So I'm just going to put my presentation back up and share my screen. Come on, computer. You can do it. There we go. Okie dokes. Hopefully everyone can see that again. Wonderful. Oh no, it's paused my screen sharing. I don't know why. I don't know how to unpause it. Sorry, technical hitch. Right, there we go. Should I have it back again now? Excellent, wonderful, thanks Richard. So we're looking at need, and we're thinking about need and articulating a need and how do you make sure you focus it. And I think Rosie really summed up actually some of the the ways of doing that that we'd covered. So thank you very much for that, Rosie. So we're going to move on to solution now. And again, a bit like before, just to recap on what I mean by solution. And this is the what you're going to do, you know, the who, what, where, why, how stuff. So when did the thing happen? What would be paid for? Funds were received? Who will be involved? Who's going to benefit? What will the key achievements be, and so on. I'm not going to reiterate this again, so it's covered in other materials. But what we are going to talk about is how to explore ways of telling your funder about the proposed solution. And particularly, we're going to look at how we do that using a beneficiary-led approach rather than an organisational one. So actually, Jan's point about storytelling is perfectly segued into this section as well, because this is a lot of what it's about. So thank you for that, Jan. It's a really top tip. Okay, so articulating your solution, what do you need to think about in doing so? Well, really what we're often thinking about is you need to articulate why your solution, why your way of doing things is the right one. What's the decision-making process that led to that proposed solution? If thinking about the questions a fundraiser is going to funder might ask, and make sure you address those right up front, especially if perhaps a cheaper or more obvious solution is theoretically available. So, for example, if you were seeking funding to buy a building, why is that the right solution as opposed to renting a building? So sometimes we're getting someone outside your organisation or outside of the project itself just to have a read of what you've written or to challenge you and ask those questions, because sometimes we just assume that the way we've been doing things is the right way to do it, and some of the obvious questions that a non-expert or someone not in your field or not in that area of your work might just go, well, why do it that way? Why not this way, which is what I would go to? We're going to talk a little bit more about challenging ways of thinking in a moment. Also, make sure that you link the need to the funder's requirements. So make sure when you're articulating your solution and your need that you're understanding how the funder, why the funder might be interested in that. So how it will overcome a specific challenge perhaps that the funder is interested in, something they're interested in supporting, and how you've identified that as a need. So it's bringing the need and the solution together to really tell that story, and also to bring in the funder's perspective into that story. So building on what we looked at in the needs section. And remember to also keep the solution outcome or impact focused. What changes as a result of this? And I think sometimes when we think about solutions, we get so embedded in the detail of this will happen, and this is the task, and this is who will do it, and talk about the practicalities that we forget the why. And actually that's what funders are really interested in, is the so what happens as a result of this. So making sure you focus on those outcomes and that approach as you tell the story, and making that whole story come together to be really clear to the funder as to why this is the right solution to that particular need and why you should be interested and the change it's going to create. Now, one of the things that's really becoming more increasingly important is thinking about the way that you involve beneficiaries in the development of activities. And although this is kind of really stemmed from the kind of health and social care sector, it's really gaining traction across the charity sector more broadly, and with funders in lots of different areas, but particularly grant makers. How do you embrace and involve people who be beneficiaries or perhaps have lived experience of the issue you're trying to challenge? How are they involved in defining and creating a project or activities? How were they included in that? And what we've really seen over the last few years is a shift from kind of involvement to co-production. So I've put this ladder up here to kind of show you how that's different. And it's known as the co-production ladder in the sector, unsurprisingly, and it's an evolution of the ladder of citizen participation by Arnstein from the late 60s, and just shows different ways of engaging beneficiaries in the service that they access. So right at the bottom in that blue section, we've got the doing to. And this isn't really something we see anymore. I think it's pretty much gone out, it's way out of fashion, and it's not even something you see in organisations at all much anymore. But that education, I'm going to do too. You are passive in this action. And over the last few years, we've absolutely seen organisations doing this consultation, engagement type work, which is very much, step in the right direction, and it's really important. This doing for. So you're talking and you're consulting and you're doing that. But actually, where we're moving towards, and we're starting to see this in all sectors, is this doing with, this idea of co-production and co-design, co-development. What co-production and co-design means is not that beneficiaries do more, but it's that they have an equal voice in designing and shaping the services, projects, programs or activities they focus. It doesn't mean they dictate them, but they help that design, delivery and evolution of how they work. So it's not about placing their view above any kind of experts or people who more experienced in a particular area. It's about recognizing the value that multiple voices, all from different experiences, backgrounds and perspectives, can have. It doesn't place any greater weight with any one of those voices, and that's really important to remember. The aim is, though, that ultimately ensures that projects and services actually meet a need which is really there and really understood, and it's the right form of solution. So it obviously helps you develop and deliver a better project for users, but it also helps your funder understand and get why that solution is meeting that need, because the need is being defined and co-produced by those who benefit from it, as well as those who perhaps know the area and are the experts in their particular field coming together. And I think I asked this afternoon whether people got experience in co-production, and a few people had started to. It seems to be something that is coming into the sector. So I mean, if you want to put in the chat, if you've gotten experiences, that'd be fantastic. But I think it feels like something that's relatively new, but it's starting to be something that is even in the kind of museums and archives world coming through. So do feel free to share experiences in the chat. But I think a lot of you might feel like it's something quite new and something perhaps you haven't experienced yet. So I thought what I might do is give you a toolbox of things to think about and things to use that you might want to do if you are looking to look at co-producing projects and funding bids and applications as well. Rosie's told me, yes, she did apply to do a co-design fund, but didn't do enough of it. So that's really interesting. Thanks, Rosie. So hopefully maybe I can give you some tools for my toolbox that Rosie could use that the rest of you can. So we'll see if they start whizzing out, and I'll explain them as we go. So my first tool I'm going to give you is an ear. And what I mean by this ear is basically it's not just about listening, but it's about hearing what's being said. And when you're talking in co-production, it's really easy to do what we all do a lot of the time, which is listen for the things that back up what we already know. And actually, co-production is about hearing what's being said and not just what you're looking for. So making sure you really understand your own perspectives, your own bias, your own agendas, and putting those, behind you is really important. So think about listening and hearing what's being said, not just what you want to find out. My second point is that everybody is going to have their own perspective, and they're not always going to agree. There's going to be conflict. But if everyone's voice is equal, and those people with lived experience or beneficiaries have equal voice as professionals or experts, they're not more or less valid. I can't reiterate that more. It's just they are equal, but they'll come from different places. So allowing space for each of those voices to be heard as well as listened to is really important. And another tool that you'll need to have in order to really make that happen is some kind of charter or contract. And the aim of a charter or contract is to make sure that everyone understands where they're coming from, and they're clear that what the expectations are of each other, how they can all feed in, that there's a safe space for everyone to contribute, and that everyone has a right to input and do so. So creating that charter or contract in place and building getting everyone's input into what that looks like is really important. My next tool is a tape recorder, or it's actually a dictaphone, but don't have any of those around. I normally use my mobile phone to do this, making sure clearly I've got permission to do the recording. I find that recording conversations that I'm having while co-producing work can be really, really valuable for a few reasons. Firstly, it allows me to go back and listen to sessions again when I'm not in the moment. And it allows me to do that stepping back and thinking, well, what are my agendas? What was I listening for? Because we'll always do it. We'll always come with our own agendas. So it allows me to listen again, trying to take out my own agenda and listen really carefully to what's being said. I can also be in the moment without scribbling frantically. And the third thing is that often for fundraising, I can get some really nice quotes from it that I can use either in my application writing itself, in the development of the work, or within reporting back to funders on the process that I've used. So again, make sure these are anonymised and or, you've got permission from the person who said it. So that'd be great. My next thing in the toolbox is about making it sure you've got a nice, safe, relaxed space for people to feel safe to talk about. So thinking about location that co-production sessions happen in. Now, clearly, at the moment, we're a little bit restricted to Zoom. But even in that, even if you're having to do things remotely, how do you make people feel safe and that their voice is heard? And when you do have people coming from very different perspectives, how do you bring them together? And that's where the charter can really help. But thinking about the environment you're creating, and by environment, I both mean physical, but also, the space you create. So having, a room full of people with letters before or after their name and one person who hasn't, how does that make the person feel? How can you make it much more even playing field for co-production to be happening? My next tool is about information giving. And one of the ways that you need to ensure that co-production can really happen is by making sure that everyone feels that they're starting on an even playing field. Where again, when you've got people who are seen as experts in a field as beneficiaries, there may be a sense that, well, they know it way better than I do. I can't possibly have a valid input. So trying to start everyone on a level playing field, trying to bring everyone to the same point of understanding is really important. Allowing them to make educated choices and educated statements. That might be something you can provide in written form. It might be something you need to do in talk to them about, run a workshop, even provide a video to give context and evidence so that everyone feels that they're in the same starting point. And ultimately, if you can do that, the better co-production is going to come out of it. And then my final thing in the toolbox is just a draft document. And actually thinking about how you can collaboratively create a document, a proposal, a project application that comes out of this is important. What I'm not talking about here is kind of wordsmithing by committee, because that's a blinking nightmare, as we all know. What you are talking about is finding a way that people can input into elements of things. So sharing aspects of drafts and structuring conversations about how does this feel. We're not talking about the words and the form. We're talking about how does it feel. Those are things. I'm just going to refer to, because Kolya, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, I massively apologise. I put a note in the chat here saying they've got experience in co-production of events and activities in other non-archival fields, and their feeling is it depends on the kind of initiative whether it will be improved with more voices or not. It depends on the organisational capacity. Absolutely. It takes more capacity to organise co-production that works well, but it can also add capacity by combining different strengths and allowing things to be possible that would not be possible if each organisation acted alone. And I think that's exactly right. Co-production is not easy. It's hard work. It takes longer. It takes more resource. But if done well and done properly, it can make a massively stronger project, and I find a much stronger funding application. And that's what we're talking about today. Because the need is not just, well, I'm saying it, it's we're saying it. And the solution is not just I'm saying it, it's we're saying it. So I think if you can find the ways to do this and to do it constructively, it can be of real benefit. Thank you for your input. So just to sum up then on solution, I think really starting to think about how you articulate to your funder, not just what the solution is, but how you came to that solution and why that solution aligns with their interests and approach. So not just, well, we think you're interested in this, but actually you get it in this way. We've seen that in other things you've done. And then being clear to the funder on the change in the outcomes that's going to happen and the impact, the longer term change as well. So before we just sort of wrap up and go to questions, I'm just going to click to the next slide to remind you about Module 3. So Module 3, we're going to look at the next couple of sections on this kind of case of support area. That's next Monday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it's actually Wednesday evening next week at 8 o'clock in the evening. So hopefully you'll be able to join us there. And finally, questions, it's over to you. We've got about 10-15 minutes just to go through, and a slightly smaller group this afternoon, so we went a bit faster. But I'm going to stop the screen share so I can see you all if you'd like to have a look. We'll keep recording for the moment, but do feel free to either unmute yourself, show me your video and wave at me, or put a question in the chat, and Richard and I will see if we can answer anything you want to know. No, it's all so comprehensive. I'll give everyone a few minutes just to type anything in the chat if they want to put it in there. That's fine. Okay. Do feel free to unmute yourself if that's easier. Any questions? Today, Richard, they're all very quiet this evening. Everyone's tired.
Maybe people are typing.
Maybe. Catherine's got a question. Lovely. Thanks, Catherine.
Kind of a question, kind of an observation. Apologies, everyone hates that. It's mostly that to do this co-producing model, for my archive, I would need to do a lot of relationship building first to actually have anyone that I could go in with in this level of involvement. Most of the funding bids I want to do are just for cataloguing. I just need bodies on the ground to do my to do cataloguing or that kind of thing. So for me, it would be quite, I mean, I completely get why this would be great, but it would be quite difficult to lay that groundwork, it feels like.
And I think it totally depends. And obviously, if you're doing a capital project, for example, then this would be much more, if you're redesigning a building or something, it's been much more relevant. If you're doing a project which is trying to get a particular demographic of people to access, your service, then this might be more relevant. So yeah, for certain things, of course, this isn't right. And I think, you've got to use your knowledge of that to decide when is this worthwhile, because it is a lot of effort. And if it's not going to add value, don't bother, I think. Oh, we've got another. Yeah, hello.
I've got a question about if you're say raising money for a particular archival collection, and it's quite a specialist collection, but is a general fund, it's quite likely no one on the committee will actually really understand the significance of the collection. And obviously, you have to put it in as persuasive terms as possible, but even so, it might be they just simply don't get it, because especially if it's a sort of obscure archive that doesn't seem particularly relevant. I mean, in a way, I think also some of the more obscure archives are some of the very important ones to protect, precisely because they're not the sort of most popular. And so how do you deal with that?
I think the key thing is to make sure you can really articulate why this is important and why this is special. Because if it's something unique and something kind of different, then what you've got to prove is this is of value and why that specialism is interesting to them. You've got to kind of almost convince, if you're thinking they're not going to understand it, it's your job really to make it really clear why they should value it and why they understand it. So that's about that articulation of that need. So thinking, well, if what they're interested in is obscure archives, then explain to them this is an obscure archive and that's why you should be interested. If what they're interested in is something more generic, then you've got to be able to prove to them why this obscure thing is important. And Jan has suggested, maybe going for general funds isn't the right strategy, which I think is quite a good point. Richard, you've got more experience with this particular thing. Do you have anything else to?
Sorry, I was having a little discussion with Kate about joining instructions.
Oh, sorry.
So I was slightly distracted. But yeah, I mean, if I had £1 for every time people said that their own cause wasn't interesting, I'd be quite rich by now. I think it's about finding what makes that connection.
Yeah. It's just that's the difficult thing, but that's actually what fundraising is, isn't it? It's just sales and it's storytelling, and you've got to find the way to articulate it that's going to grab their interest. And that might be about just one person on the on a panel or whatever. You can do some research into that. Oh, I know they like that thing, or they've got some experience in that world. So just sorry, it's not a really helpful magic wand solution.
Yes, it's also about keeping like your language simple and not using lots of jargon, and not sort of, if you feel personally that you can understand why some people wouldn't understand your collection yet, then yeah, definitely keep jargon free anyway. But if you're doing it to try and build engagement, then then it seems like a perfect thing to be doing.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Rosie. Okay, are there any other questions?
Can I comment on that as well?
Yeah, Jan, please do. Absolutely.
Because we're in an archives webinar, you know, obscure is also unique. So you've got a unique selling point. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Brilliant. Any other questions?
Rosie had one in the chat about when you do
sorry, thank you. Yes.
So with the application we did, I say we did, my colleagues did it, so I didn't have involvement in it, but I might wrongly assume that there wasn't much co-production. Like, I think they were planning to do co-production, and actually when we put the application in for that, they hadn't, as far as I can understand. Whereas one we've done that was more successful with the National Lottery, we've done the groundwork first. So we've done the surveys and things.
Yeah, I think the whole point of co-production is the whole thing is co-produced. So right from the beginning, so to start co-production, once you have say we will co-produce the project, it feels too far down the line. I think you do need to have at least some of it done. So you're co-producing the scope, if not the specifics, because I appreciate that the specific project delivery might change, but that's the point. It's co-production doesn't just happen at one point. It happens throughout the lifetime of a project. So you'd co-produce you'd co-design how a project's going to be, you co-produce the project, and you probably co-evaluate as going on, whether that's you like a project steering group that beneficiaries sit on alongside other people, whatever it might be. So it's a kind of cradle to grave process. So you would want to have done something before you started. Apologies for not picking that up in the chat, and thank you to the other Rosie for highlighting it. So yeah, brilliant. Okay, if there are no other burning questions, then thank you very much for your time. I will hopefully see you all at module 3 either next Monday or next Wednesday, and yeah, thank you for your input this evening. Right, then we can stop recording.